and welcome to this video. I'm Mario in Black, and this is part 2 of the Hockey Basics series. Today I want to talk about what I'm calling the PWHL season. This will include the roster makeup, draft, the trades, the league standings, and the playoffs. Last week hopefully got a foot in the door on the sport itself, and this week I hope to expand on that by telling you more how the league works with a little more info on the sport thrown in to hopefully paint a better picture. So thank you all for being here, and let's do this. I'll start with the roster construction and the roles within a roster. Each team has 23 rostered players under contract. 20 of these are skaters and 3 are goalies. Each team can have up to 3 reserve players who can be signed to a short-term contract to be activated to the regular roster. This commonly happens when there's injuries. They do practice with the team, but generally don't get much playing time unless one of those injuries occurs. For a game day lineup, teams will submit 21 of those 23 players on it. 19 are skaters and 2 are goalies. Thus, 1 skater and 1 goalie will be considered scratched for the game and will not be in uniform or available to play by that team during that game. The game day lineup is typically divided into these 4 groups: 4 forward lines, 3 defensive pairs, 2 goalies, and an extra player that plays either offense or defense. I'll go into this a bit more on the next slide. Each team can have up to 1 captain and 2 alternate captains. They can also have 3 alternate captains with no captain as well. These players wear letters on their jerseys signifying their leadership position. C for captain and A for alternate. They typically don't change over the course of the season. If one of the players gets hurt and cannot play, another player is often given an A in the interim until the injured player comes back. It's very rare that a player is given a C if the captain is injured. Teams will typically run 3 alternate captains when the normal captain is out. There is no rule that a team has to run a captain. In other leagues, teams left the position empty for different reasons and only run the 3 alternate captains in that game. All 8 PWHL teams as of this recording have designated captains, and no team has ever run without a captain except in the case where the captain has been injured. So let's break down the game day lineup a bit more. Each team runs 4 forward groups of 3 players, 2 wings and a center. These lines will substitute in and out during the game, and typically the line with the most talent and skill will have the most time on the ice, while other lines may play less minutes but in more situational positions depending on how the game is going. Teams have 3 defensive pairs as well. As with the lines, the top pair ends up usually playing the most minutes. There's an extra player I talked about earlier that can fill in a role as needed. They typically play little minutes in a game, if any at all, but they can be used as an extra forward or defender to put in and fill whatever role their skill set best helps with. There's 2 goalies on the game day roster. In most games, the goalie that starts will play the entire game. The backup is there if the starting goalie gets hurt or if the starter has to be pulled out of the game for something like underperformance. Sometimes the goalie may just be having a bad game, and other times the team as a whole may not be helping the goalie, and the coach will switch goalies to try to spark some life into the team if they're down big early. Power plays and penalty kills, otherwise known as special teams, have their own units. Power plays are typically preset groups of 5, so they're not divided by forwards and defense. Sometimes teams will run 4 forwards and 1 defender on a power play, since forwards typically produce more offense. Many teams run 2 power play units, a primary one and a secondary unit for when the first one is tired and needs to substitute off. Penalty kills are generally divided into forward pairs and defensive pairs. Certain players are generally given more time on a penalty kill if they're skilled on the defensive aspect of the game. Teams also have to mix and match at times if one of those key penalty killers is the one who took the penalty and is unavailable as they're in the penalty box. If a team is shorthanded by 2 players, they typically run a defensive pair and a single forward that is reliable defensively. For 3-on-3 overtime, teams typically have 3 player groups that practice together for those specific situations, since overtime is relatively frequent during a given season. Here's an example of a game day lineup put out from the Ottawa Chards and the Toronto Scepters for their April 11th game. You can see the lineups are divided into forward, defensive, and goaltending groups. In the case of this game, there's an extra player on each team's defense. In this game, both of the extra defenders played a few minutes for their team, but there's been prior cases where the extra player played no minutes. Let's zoom in a bit on the Ottawa roster as I discuss the roster a bit more. The lines and pairs here match up with what the teams generally played during the game. So the top group for Ottawa, Sarah Wozniewicz, Brianne Jenner, and Rebecca Leslie all typically played together on the same line. Same goes for the defense. Ronja Savalainen typically plays on the same pair as Rory Gilday. Teams do not put out power play and penalty kill units when announcing their game day rosters. Only the normal forward lines and defensive pair for when the game is at 5-on-5 like it is for most of the game. I want to briefly discuss trades. Players can be traded for other players during the season. It happens if a team feels they need a player that fits a specific role and have a player they can give up that wouldn't be a huge detriment to losing. Draft picks cannot be traded with the exception of during the draft itself. An example is last season when New York traded Abby Rock to Montreal for Kristen O'Neill and Montreal's 4th-round draft pick during the draft event. I have an example of a trade graphic here. It was the largest trade by number of players in PWHL history at the time. Ottawa sent Manon McMahon, Anna Meixna, and Anna Shohina to Vancouver in return for Michaela Cava, Brooke McQuigg, and Emma Greco. PWHL contract info is not publicly available. It's likely that the contracts are traded to the new team and assumed by that team. I know in other leagues there's things like salary retention and all sorts of little things in trades that can be very complicated if you're not aware of the finer details. I don't know what level of detail PWHL trades are. They seem to be fairly simple on the surface at the very least. The league's collective bargaining agreement between the league and the players' union is what determines all those finer details. Moving on to how the season is constructed. Teams play a total of 30 games, 15 as the home team and 15 as the road team. The PWHL does takeover tour games every year in neutral cities. During these games, teams will be designated as a home or road team even though it's neither team's home venue. In the 2 seasons there's been takeover games to date, teams play about 2 to 3 of these games in those neutral venues per season. There's also cases of a team playing at a special home site, like the New York Sirens playing a single game at Madison Square Garden, or the Montreal Victoire playing a single game at the Bell Center. These are both big NHL arenas. There's still home games for those teams, but special event games instead of takeover games since they're not at a neutral site. Team performance determines where they are in the standings. Winning, as you may know, is good. Winning in regulation is even better, though. You get 3 points when you win in regulation versus the 2 points you get if the game goes past regulation to overtime or a shootout. If the game does get to overtime or a shootout, you're guaranteed 1 point, even with a loss. And maybe you get that extra point if you can pull off a win. You get no points, though, if you lose in regulation, however. If you get into the top 4, you make the playoffs. The top team picks their first-round opponent from the bottom 2 playoff teams. I'll get into that a little bit more later. Eliminated teams compete for draft position through something called the Gold Plan, which I'll detail in a bit as well. I'll say a few of these things multiple times in the presentation, but I also want to highlight that this can all change in the future as more teams come in and the league rules change. Playoffs could expand, the season could get longer, who knows? But this is all as of the date of this recording. I'll probably update all of this if there's any significant changes in the future, but this is how it is now. Just note that everything could change in the future, and I'm going to probably keep hammering that home. Alright, let's see all that applied. Here's the standings of the 2024-2025 season taken from the PWHL website. I'll go over each column to help you better understand how to read the standings. Something to note is Vancouver and Seattle didn't exist in the season, so it was only the original 6 teams in the league for these standings. What I want to highlight first is the section in gray called PTS. These stand for points. This is how you sort the standings. You can see they're sorted from highest to lowest, top down in this standing sheet. There's 3 teams that are tied at 44 points, and I'll get to tiebreaker procedures in the next couple slides. On the far left of the standings are the rankings within the standings, and then it's the team name and logos of each team. There's an X and an E next to some of the teams. The X is for the teams that clinched a playoff spot, and the E means they're eliminated from the playoffs. Early in the season, you won't see these designations as teams will have not clinched playoff positioning or have been eliminated yet. You typically see these pop up later in the season. Next up is the GP column, which stands for games played, and the one after is called GR for games remaining. Since this is from a completed season, every team has played 30 games and have no games remaining. This is useful if you're looking at standings during the season, and you can see one team has 8 games left as an example, and another team has 6. So you know that the team with 8 games left has more opportunity to pick up points than a team with 6 games remaining. And looping back around is the point total, as mentioned, highlighted in gray. This is the most important part of the standings because that's the primary way you sort the teams for the playoffs. The next 4 columns are all grouped together. The regulation wins, overtime losses, and regulation losses in that order. Each of these numbers adds up to make the point total for the team. So in Montreal's case, they have 12 regulation wins. Multiply those by the 3 points you get for them, it's 36 points. They have 7 overtime or shootout wins. Multiply those by 2, that's 14. And they had 3 overtime losses, which adds up to 3 points. They get 1 point for each of those. You add those 3 numbers together, 36, 14, and 3, and that leads to the 53 points you see on their page. The next column is the points percentage. So in this case, since the team has played 30 games, they could theoretically earn 90 points if they won every single game. So the points percentage is determined by dividing the points they have earned by that total number of points. So in Montreal's case, it's 53 divided by 90 to get the .589 point percentage they have. The last 2 columns are goals for and goals against. These are the total number of goals scored by a team in a season and the total of number of goals they've given up by a team in a season. All right, let's talk a little bit about tiebreakers. So tiebreakers go in the following order on this list to determine who's above who when the point totals are tied. Once one of these criteria can sort 2 teams, then the teams are sorted in that order and there's no need to go further down the tiebreaker list. If 3 teams are tied, the same process is used, but one team can be sorted out, and then you're down to 2 tied teams and you just keep going down the list until you meet one of those criteria. The first tiebreaker only matters during the regular season and becomes moot when the season ends. It's the fewer number of games played. By the end of the season, all teams play the same number of games, but during the season, the team with less games played is at the top since they can earn more future points, given that they have more games to play and more opportunity to earn those points. The next 3 are the first 3 tiebreakers that would be used at the end of the season when all the games are played. They're all based on wins. First is wins and regulations. Then you add overtime wins to that. So regulation plus overtime wins. And then you add the shootout wins to that. So total wins in any manner. If the teams are still tied, they are sorted by points earned in games against each other. So say a team plays each other twice. Team A wins in regulation in game 1, and they get 3 points. Team B wins in overtime in game 2. So they get 2 points and Team A gets 1 point. Team A would earn 4 points in this scenario and Team B would earn 2. So Team A would have priority and have the higher standing. If still tied after this, it goes to goal differential. So you subtract the goals allowed from the goals scored, and whichever team has the higher number has the better seeding. And lastly, it's most goals scored between the tied teams. I don't know what happens after this. It's incredibly unlikely a tie in the standings would ever get this deep into the procedure. But if ever does, we'll all find out together what the next step is. So let's go back to those standings from last year and sort out those teams that are ranked from 3rd to 5th. I know they're already sorted out here, but I'd like to talk about it anyway, just so you get an idea of what it is. In the case of these 3 teams, it's a 3-way tie, and the first tiebreaker after the season, which is total wins, is actually what sorts the 3 teams out. You can see Ottawa is in 3rd place. They have 12 total wins. Then it's Minnesota, who has 10 total wins, and then Boston, who has 9 total wins. And in this case, Ottawa and Minnesota end up qualifying for the playoffs as the 3rd and 4th seed. And even though Boston is tied in points, they miss out on the playoffs as they have the least number of total wins of the three teams tied in the tiebreaker. These standings don't depict OT wins and shootout wins as separate values. They're combined in the OTW, so overtime win column. I can tell you that all three teams won 2 games in overtime. So if for some reason all those wins were tied and you added up the wins and overtime wins, they would still be tied because they all won the same number of overtime games. Now, if you went to the shootout, which is the totality of that OTW column, Boston would actually be tied with Minnesota in priority as they both have 15 if you combine those two numbers. But since they were already sorted by wins in the first place, there's no point in going further down the tiebreaker column as the tie is already sorted. In other leagues, it's often that a team with the worst record gets the top pick in the draft, or there's some sort of lottery system with odds based around the final season standings. But in the PWHL, once a team gets eliminated from playoff contention, they can start earning points for their draft position. All points they pick up after elimination goes toward what's called a gold plan. The team with the most points after elimination gets the top pick. So while the team that does the worst may not get the top pick, if they get eliminated first, they have the most time to accrue those gold plan points. Tied teams are sorted based on the past criteria you saw a couple slides ago on the tiebreaker slides. However, if two teams have 0 points, so they haven't earned any points toward the gold plan because they got eliminated maybe the final day of the season, it's based on which team got eliminated earlier in the season, and if they're tied from there, then you go to the other tiebreaker criteria. For the rest of the draft, the champion picks last, the playoff runner-up picks second to last, and the eliminated teams in the first round pick in reverse order based on how they finished in the standings. The league is still growing, and there's likely to be more expansion teams on the way. For the first year of expansion, these two teams picked after the already established teams. I do assume this is how it's going to go in the future, or at least the very near future, but I highlight my last note here, which is, just me pounding the point home from a couple slides ago, that these rules can change from year to year. In fact, they've used a couple of different setups for the first 2 entry drafts, so the rules were not consistent from the first entry draft to the second entry draft. So this is based on the most recent data points I have. These are always subject to change. Just have to stay tuned and find out. As mentioned, the top 4 teams all duke it out in the playoffs, and the top team gets to pick their first round opponent from the 3rd and 4th place teams in the standings. Whoever they don't pick will play the second place team. The first round is a best-of-5 series where the better-seeded team hosts games 1, 2, and 5, while the lower-seeded team hosts games 3 and 4. The series ends when a team wins 3 games, so if one team wins all 3, there's no game 4 and 5, and it's called a series sweep. However, if each team wins 2 games each in the first 4 games, then they play a game 5 that's often called winner-take-all, where the winner moves on and the loser is eliminated. So the winners of those 2 first-round series will play in the Walter Cup Finals, and the better-seeded team gets hosting priority. The finals are the same best-of-5 format, so like with the first round, the better-seeded team gets to host the first 2 games as well as a potential 5th and decisive game for all the marbles and the big trophy at the end. Unlike regular season games that play 3-on-3 overtime for 5 minutes in a shootout if still tied, the playoffs are continuous sudden-death overtime until someone scores. All periods are 20 minutes of 5-on-5 play and will end when a team scores. If one of those 20-minute period elapses, there will be an intermission and 20 more minutes will be put on the clock and they'll go at it again. These games can go very long if nobody scores. There was a game last season between Ottawa and Montreal that went to 4 overtime periods before it finally ended. And that's the overview of the PWHL roster and how the season works. There's a little bit of overlap with prior presentations, but I hope this was a good divide. And last week kind of taught you a lot about the sport, and this week taught you a lot about how the league works. So next week I'll be talking about offside and icing. These things kind of hang up a lot of new fans whenever they're getting into the sport. Until then, feel free to like and subscribe if you want. I hope you found this video informative. Leave any feedback, any requests you have in the comments, and I hope all of you have a great day.